Picture this. It's 2 a.m., and you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The room is dark, save for the faint glow of streetlights slipping through the blinds. The world outside is silent, but inside your mind, it's a storm. A memory from years ago creeps in uninvited. A moment you thought you'd buried deep. Maybe it's the time you said something cruel to someone you loved, and the look on their face still haunts you. Or maybe it's a failure that stings, like it happened yesterday. A missed opportunity that you replay over and over, thinking, if only I'd done things differently. Your heart starts racing, your chest tightens, and you're right back there, reliving every second of that pain. You try to push it away, to tell yourself, it's over, let it go. But the harder you try, the more it grips you. Why? Why can't you stop obsessing over the past? Why does it feel like these memories have a hold on you? Like they're chains you can't break free from? Now imagine this. You're walking through a house you've never seen before, but somehow it feels familiar. The walls are lined with mirrors, and as you pass each one, you catch a glimpse of yourself. But it's not the you of today. It's the you from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a version of you frozen in a moment of shame, regret, or loss. You want to look away, but you can't. Each mirror pulls you in, forcing you to relive those moments, to feel the weight of every mistake, every word you wish you could take back. You keep walking, hoping to find a way out, but the house seems endless, and the mirrors keep multiplying. What if this house isn't just a metaphor? What if it's your mind, and those mirrors are the memories you've tried to bury? What if the past isn't something you can ever truly leave behind, but something that lives inside you, shaping who you are, whether you like it or not? Let's take a step back. Think about the last time a memory from the past hit you out of nowhere. Maybe you were driving, and a song came on the radio that reminded you of a time you'd rather forget. Or maybe you saw someone who looked like an old friend, and suddenly you were flooded with guilt over how things ended between you. In that moment, what did you do? Did you try to distract yourself, to push the memory away? Did you tell yourself, I need to move on, as if moving on were as simple as flipping a switch? But here's the question. If it's really that simple, why can't you do it? Why does the past keep coming back, like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised? What if the harder you try to run from it, the more power it has over you? What if the past isn't just a collection of memories, but a living force inside you, one that's been shaping your thoughts, your actions, your entire sense of self, without you even realizing it? Maybe you're thinking right now, I don't want to live in the past. I want to focus on the present, on the future. But what if the past isn't something you can just leave behind? What if it's not a place you've been, but a part of who you are? What if every time you try to ignore it, you're actually ignoring a piece of yourself? How many times have you told yourself you're over it, only to find yourself spiraling into the same old memories the next time you're alone with your thoughts? How many times have you tried to outrun your past, only to realize it's always one step ahead of you? To understand why the past has such a grip on us, we need to look deeper, not just at the memories themselves, but at what's hiding beneath them, in the shadows of our psyche. Let's turn to Carl Jung, a man who spent his life exploring the hidden corners of the human mind. Jung believed that we all have a shadow, a part of ourselves we don't want to see, a repository for everything we've repressed, ignored, or rejected. This shadow isn't just made up of our flaws or our darkest impulses. It's also where we store the memories we can't bear to face, the ones that carry shame, guilt, or pain. When you obsess over the past, when you can't stop replaying that moment you failed, that argument you regret, that loss you can't let go of, what you're really doing is brushing up against your shadow. Those memories aren't just random thoughts. They're fragments of your shadow self, trying to get your attention, begging to be seen. Jung argued that the shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It's active, alive, and it influences us in ways we don't even realize. When you try to bury a painful memory, you're not getting rid of it. You're giving it more power. It festers in the unconscious, growing stronger until it finds a way to break through. That's why a random song, a familiar smell, or a passing comment can send you spiraling back to a moment you thought you'd forgotten. It's not the memory itself that's haunting you. It's the unprocessed emotion tied to it, the part of your shadow you've refused to acknowledge. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if your obsession with the past isn't just a bad habit, but a sign that your shadow is calling out to you, demanding to be integrated? Let's look at this through another lens. Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. Nietzsche believed that we're all shaped by what he called the spirit of revenge, a deep-seated resentment toward the past. He wrote, "Man cannot learn to forget, but hangs on the past. However far or fast he runs, that chain runs with him." For Nietzsche, this obsession with the past isn't just about memory. It's about our inability to accept what we cannot change. When you replay a moment of failure in your mind, when you torture yourself with what ifs, you're not just remembering, you're seeking revenge on time itself. You're angry at the past for happening the way it did, and you're angry at yourself for not being able to change it. But here's the paradox. The more you resent the past, the more it controls you. The more you try to fight it, the tighter its grip becomes. What if your obsession with the past isn't just about the memories, but about your refusal to let go of this spirit of revenge? Now let's bring in a psychological perspective to understand why this happens on a deeper level. Our brains are wired to hold on to negative experiences more than positive ones, a phenomenon known as the negativity bias. This bias evolved as a survival mechanism. If our ancestors forgot about a dangerous predator, they wouldn't live long enough to pass on their genes. So our brains developed a tendency to cling to painful memories, to replay them over and over as a way of learning from them. But in the modern world, this mechanism often backfires. That argument you had with your best friend 10 years ago isn't a predator you need to avoid, but your brain treats it like one. Every time you think about it, your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear and emotional responses, lights up, flooding your body with stress hormones like cortisol. You're not just remembering the past, you're reliving it, physically and emotionally, as if it's happening right now. What if your brain's own wiring is what's keeping you trapped in the past, turning every memory into a threat you can't escape? But it's not just biology at play here, it's also culture. We live in a society that tells us to move on, to let go, as if the past is something we can just toss aside like an old pair of shoes. We're bombarded with messages about living in the present, about focusing on the future, as if the past is a burden we shouldn't carry. But what if this cultural pressure to forget is actually making things worse? What if, by trying to ignore the past, we're giving it more power to haunt us? So what happens when you can't stop obsessing over the past? Let's start with the personal level, because this is where the impact hits hardest. Every time you replay a painful memory, every time you get stuck in a loop of what ifs, you're not just thinking, you're shaping who you are. Those memories, those fragments of your shadow, don't just sit in your mind, they influence your behavior, your decisions, your entire sense of self. Maybe you're someone who struggles with trust in relationships, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because a betrayal from years ago still lingers in your shadow. Or maybe you're afraid to take risks, to chase your dreams, because a failure from the past has convinced you that you're not good enough. What if your obsession with the past isn't just a mental habit, but a force that's dictating how you live your life without you even realizing it? Let's take a closer look at how this plays out in relationships. When you're haunted by the past, you don't just carry your own pain, you project it onto others. Maybe you had a parent who was overly critical, and now every time someone offers you feedback, you hear their voice instead of the person in front of you. Or maybe you were hurt by an ex, and now you push people away before they can get too close, because your shadow is whispering, "Don't let it happen again." This is what Jung called projection. When we refuse to face our shadow, we see it in others instead. The past doesn't just live in your mind, it lives in your interactions, in the way you love, in the way you fight, in the way you build or destroy the connections that matter most. How many relationships have you damaged because you couldn't let go of a memory? How many opportunities for love have you missed because your shadow was calling the shots? But the impact doesn't stop with you. it ripples out into society at large. We live in a world that's obsessed with the past, even if we don't always admit it. Think about the way we hold on to grudges, not just as individuals, but as communities, as nations. Wars are fought over historical grievances, prejudices are passed down through generations, and entire cultures are shaped by the traumas of their past. This collective obsession with the past isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal one. And just like on the personal level, the more we try to ignore it, the more power it has. Look at the rise of nostalgia in our culture. Everywhere you turn, there's a reboot of an old TV show, a revival of 90s fashion, a longing for the good old days. But what if this nostalgia isn't just harmless sentimentality? What if it's a symptom of our collective inability to face the past, to integrate it, to learn from it? What if by romanticizing the past, we're actually trapping ourselves in it? Let's bring neuroscience back into the picture to understand why this obsession feels so inescapable. When you obsess over a painful memory, your brain doesn't just replay the event, it rewires itself. This is called neuroplasticity. The more you think about something, the stronger the neural pathways associated with it become. Every time you revisit that moment of failure, that argument, that loss, you're carving a deeper groove in your brain, making it easier for that memory to resurface in the future. It's a vicious cycle. The more you obsess, the more your brain learns to obsess, until the past feels like a prison you can't escape. And here's the kicker. This process is amplified by something called the rumination loop. When you're stuck in a loop of negative thoughts, your brain's default mode network, the part that's active when you're not focused on a task, takes over, keeping you trapped in a cycle of overthinking. What if your brain is literally wired to keep you stuck in the past, making every attempt to move on feel like a losing battle? Now let's add another layer. Cognitive biases. One of the most powerful biases at play here is the availability heuristic, which makes us overestimate the importance of things that come to mind easily. Because painful memories are so emotionally charged, they're more available in your mind, so you give them more weight than they deserve. That argument you had with your friend 10 years ago feels like it defines your entire relationship, even if you've had countless good moments since then. This bias tricks you into thinking the past is more significant than the present, keeping you trapped in a distorted version of reality. But it's not just your brain. It's also the way society conditions us to think about the past. We're taught to see the past as something separate from us, something we can leave behind if we just try hard enough. But what if that's the biggest lie we've been told? What if the past isn't something you can leave behind because it's a part of who you are? Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, would say that this obsession with the past is a reflection of our struggle with freedom. Sartre believed that we are radically free, but that freedom comes with a heavy burden. We're free to choose how we relate to our past, but most of us don't want that responsibility. Instead, we let the past define us, because it's easier than facing the uncertainty of creating our own meaning. When you obsess over the past, you're not just remembering, you're choosing to let it control you. But what if you could choose differently? What if you could look at your past not as a prison, but as a teacher? Let's bring this back to a personal level with a story. A few years ago, I found myself stuck in a loop of my own. I kept replaying a moment from my past, a time when I let down someone I cared about deeply. I had been too caught up in my own life to be there for them when they needed me, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. For years, that memory haunted me. Every time I thought about it, I'd feel a wave of guilt wash over me, and I'd spiral into a loop of self-blame. Why didn't I do more? Why wasn't I there? I tried everything to move on. I threw myself into work. I distracted myself with hobbies. I even told myself I was over it. But the memory kept coming back, stronger each time. Then one day I decided to try something different. I sat down with a notebook and wrote out the memory in as much detail as I could. I didn't try to push it away or judge myself. I just let it be. I wrote about the guilt, the shame, the pain, and as I did, I started to see something I hadn't noticed before. That moment wasn't just a failure, it was a lesson. It taught me how to be more present, how to value the people in my life, how to show up when it matters. By facing the memory, by letting it exist without fighting it, I was able to take its power away. It didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. This brings us to a crucial question. What would happen if you stopped running from your past? What if, instead of trying to bury those painful memories, you turned to face them? Jung would say that this is the path to individuation, the process of becoming your true self. By integrating your shadow, by accepting the parts of your past you've tried to reject, you can become whole. Nietzsche would add that this is how you overcome the spirit of revenge, by saying yes to the past exactly as it happened, and choosing to learn from it instead of resenting it. Sartre would remind you that you're free to choose how you relate to your past, and that freedom is both a burden and a gift. So here's my challenge to you. The next time a painful memory comes up, don't run from it. Sit with it. Write it down. Talk about it. Feel it. Ask yourself, what is this memory trying to teach me? What part of my shadow is asking to be seen? You might be surprised by what you find. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt trapped by your past, let me know in the comments. Share your story. What memory keeps coming back? And what do you think it's trying to tell you? Until next time, don't be afraid to look in the mirror, even if what you see scares you.